In my research proposal today, we will be getting down to business by combating telomere attrition in lung disease. And now at the top right corner of your screen, you may see that this presentation is Shroot certified. And just by a show of hands or virtual hands, since we're on Zoom, I'd like to see how many of you have seen The Office. Okay, great. So I see a vast majority of you have seen this show before, and luckily I have Dwight Schrute here helping me with this presentation. So now Dwight is in a predicament. Dwight wants to be Employee of the Month, but Jim will not let that happen so easily. So that is why he decided to help me with this presentation. He's hoping to get bonus points for being a good Samaritan. Now, as you heard by my title, we will be dealing with telomere attrition. And for those of you who do not know what telomere attrition is, don't worry, I will be covering this later in the lecture. However, in order to keep track of where this roadmap will lead us and where my research will lead us, we will be going and lengthening our telomeres. And I'll explain that all later, but just so you know, in the introduction, we'll have very little or low amounts of telomeres. And then towards the end, by the summary, we will have our telomere length restored. So let's start with an introduction to my research. I'm studying idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, and this is a disease characterized by a thickening of the lung tissue, specifically scarring of the alveolar tissue. Now, this is important because this impairs proper gas exchange, leading to a shortness of breath, dry cough, even fatigue. There are currently, unfortunately, no cures or preventative measures to prevent this disease from occurring. Now, Dwight asked a very important question here. Why should I care? It doesn't impact me directly. There's unfortunately 250,000 people in the United States alone that are impacted by this disease directly, and there are 50,000 new cases diagnosed annually. Even if it doesn't directly impact you now, one day it may impact you, your friends, or your family members. But wait, although this seems very daunting, there is still hope. So we have found that there is a link between telomere shortening and between the IPF phenotype. Now, returning back, what is a telomere? So a telomere is a segment of DNA that caps the ends of linear chromosomes, because after successive replications of DNA, bits of DNA are kind of cleaved off almost. And so these telomeres help protect the important pieces of DNA that code for different genes or things that we need in order to survive. Now, telomeres shorten with age, and they can lead to this replicative senescence, and this kind of leads to the IPF disease phenotype. Now, there is an enzyme called telomerase that kind of protects these telomeres by adding on the telomere segments, kind of what I showed you in the roadmap. Now, we know that telomerase is low in somatic cells. Telomerase is higher in cells such as cancer stem cells that need to replicate more often. Now, there is a gene called TERT that encodes for telomerase. So Dwight asked a very important question. He said, could we affect this TERT gene expression in somatic or even multipotent cells in the lung epithelium to almost prevent this IPF disease progression? And yes, we can. After doing some research, we found that androgen therapies can alter TERT gene expression in multipotent and somatic cell lines. This was seen in multipotent bone marrow stem cells, as well as seen in kidney somatic stem cells. And androgen therapies, just to clarify, are the use of hormones, for example, testosterone, in order to alter gene expression. Now that we have this basic background research, we still have a knowledge gap. We have not seen the use of androgen therapy in lung tissues, specifically lung epithelium and alveolar tissue. So this leads us to our own research. Our main question is, we are asking if we apply this androgen therapy in lung tissue of a model organism with the onset of this IPF disease, will TERT gene expression be altered or will it even be enhanced and result in the slowing of disease progression? Now, our specific aim, just to reiterate, is determine the effect of androgens. Specifically, we'll be looking at testosterone on TERT gene expression. Once again, our rationale, as I have mentioned previously, is the work with androgen therapies on TERT gene expression done in kidney somatic cells and bone marrow cells. And this method seems to be easily transferable to lung tissues, just switching it to another organ system. And we know that there is a connection between telomere shortening and the IPF disease phenotype. So now we're going into our methods. We will be using a mouse as a model organism. And luckily, Dwight went to his farm and he tried to find as many rodents as he could. Unfortunately, we couldn't use that. We had to use a specific mouse model called the M. musculus mouse. And this is important because this mouse has a highly conserved TERT gene similar to humans. They're extremely easy to maintain and they're very low cost. And then there's a drug called bleomycin that can induce IPF phenotype by inducing lung scarring and lung inflammation in general. Now, for a basic introduction to our methods, I created this diagram. So let's say we start with 100 sample mice. About 20 of these experimental control mice will have no bleomycin injection. This will kind of represent a native state in order to make comparisons with the bleomycin and androgen groups. Now, 80 of these experimental mice will have periodic bleomycin injections at 10 months, which is around midlife for these mice. 5 days after this first injection of the bleomycin to induce the disease phenotype, we'll have 20 control mice that have no androgen therapy administered. Once again, this is a control to assess differences between the disease phenotype that is untreated compared to the treated groups. Now, going back, there will be 20 mice in each of the 3 following groups with the lowest concentration of androgen therapy, the middle concentration of androgen therapy, and then the highest concentration of androgen therapy. Now, going over a brief synopsis, we have covered already steps 1 and 2 in this. After about a 3-month period post the initial bleomycin injection, we will do performance tests to measure lung efficiency. We will also conduct X-rays to assess for lung epithelium scarring or lung alveolar scarring. After that, we will excise some lung tissue from these mice, and we'll perform northern blots and RQ trap. And overall, these assays are used to identify and measure TERT gene expression. Specifically, RQ trap is real-time quantitative telomerase repeat amplification protocol, and this assesses telomerase activity in general. Now, unfortunately, there may be some pitfalls when it comes to our study. First of which is the administration of testosterone. Testosterone is, once again, as I mentioned earlier, a hormone, and this may have many off-target effects. For example, testosterone is very important when it comes to development or other organ systems. So an alternative approach to administer this testosterone, instead of in the form of a slow-release pellet in a subcutaneous implant, we can do a direct injection into the lung tissue. However, this is not the first approach or the first choice for this approach, just because it's extremely hard to inject the appropriate level of testosterone into lung tissue, especially in such a small model organism. And now we have reached the end of this presentation, the end of this research. As you can see on the right, we have reached the telomere length that is ideal for these chromosomes. We're making sure that this chromosome is protected to its fullest. But in summary, I'd like to go over the fact that we discussed IPF, idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, and the disease progression in terms of the scarring of this alveolar tissue. We connected it to telomere attrition, specifically the telomere shortening over time, and the relation to TERT gene expression in trying to increase telomerase. And their specific aim, to remind you, is to determine the effects of androgens, specifically testosterone, on TERT gene expression. And now we're getting to the end of this presentation, and let's loop it back to the very beginning. Dwight only helped me because he wanted to win Employee of the Month. And thankfully, he didn't only win 1 Employee of the Month award. He won 2 Employee of the Month awards, which I call that a very good success. And now I would like to thank you for your time, and I'd like to open up the floor for you to ask any questions.